Hello, and what I'm going to do today is go over your report 2 water assignment and just give you a quick overview and give you some ideas of how to maybe approach it. This report, it shouldn't be as stressful as the first. It's not as long, first off, and secondly, it shouldn't take as much research. So if you open up the paper and then start to read over some of the objectives of this reflective paper is for students to understand the importance of deterring surface runoff in the city of Philadelphia. This is quite apt after the flooding of 2021. And what you also need to do is understand the differences between porous and non-porous surfaces. Basically, this paper is looking at why are we getting flooding, what's causing that flooding, some of the problems that have been created by actually paving over surfaces in the city, and some of the other sort of like implications of, say, things like climate change. So the actual assignment itself, it talks about the learning outcomes. These are just some things that are hopefully going to be achieved when you do your paper. Okay, so you can just read through them to give you some sort of ideas. Scientific reasoning, essential skill. This is again just criteria for the essential skill. Okay, so don't worry too much about these yet. These are some things that should be covered by the paper in itself. Okay, so if you scroll down, the directions. Write a 2-page single-spaced paper answering the questions based on the paragraph below. Okay, so I would say, page and a half to 2 pages. It's not as long as the previous paper. So you read the paragraph. Surface runoff is an enormous problem in the city of Philadelphia. Well, we saw that in the summer. When it rains in the city, water runs down the streets, sidewalks, and off parking lots, causing our rivers such as Delaware and Schuylkill to flood. Well, we saw this. What's caused it? Because besides causing flooding, the water also carries non-point source pollutants. Think about all the fertilizers that are put on yards. Think about dog waste, oil, trash, these sort of things. And what we've also sort of started to see in Philadelphia is that businesses, churches, number of stores are getting charged for the amount of surface area that is covered with impervious surfaces. It won't allow water to pass through. So we can also see this in the community college, which has had major renovations round by the pavilion, and they've got things like green roofs. They've also have an underground rainwater collection system behind the West Building. So if you're down round there, have a look, see if you can spot some of these changes that have taken place. All right, so the paper itself. Your paper should answer the following questions. So this is the main part. This is what you need to structure your paper as. So your paper should answer the following questions in detail and with a factual basis. Use some of the data that is in the following link. Also find some outside research to help back up your answers. So the paper explains the problems of surface runoff in the city of Philadelphia. So possibly the first thing you want to do is define what is surface runoff, okay, and what causes this. You might want to talk about what is a porous surface, what is a non-porous surface, and you might want to look at how things have changed over time in Philadelphia, how much of the land area has been paved over, what has happened to the springs and streams, the river directions in and around Philadelphia. So this is something that you might want to think about. And also, then once you've talked about this in the initial part, then you want to explain why the table on the link is important to understand flooding. So you click on the link, okay? And you get this Science Matters up and the urban flooding, the Philadelphia story. So you need to look through this and pull out what you think is relevant to try to answer some of the questions that you were looking at. And so there's a background to sort of like surface flooding in urban areas, and it's talking about networks underground, frequent and rapid change. So make sure you read through this. And this is a typical catchment of rainwater within a city. So how is this working in Philadelphia? What are the problems relating to it? Okay, so you might want to be very specific about that if you want to research around it. How is rainwater dealt with in Philadelphia? But this is an actual example from China, so you can just read about this, what happens, but it's very, very similar. And then if you go down, this is talking about urban drainage system in a coastal area of China. We have problems relating to things like, in the next 50 to 100 years, what's going to happen to tidal levels? What's going to happen to weather patterns? Things like this. So if you go down, then get to Philadelphia. And this assignment was done before the floods of last year. So it put in what had actually happened prior to the flood. And there is a table. Use this data and see what you can think or what you can deduce from these figures. Like date of flood, major flood, 1869. If you look, so major flood, stream flow, how fast the flow of water was. But also, look at the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at this point. If we go down, 2014, what's happening? Steadily, parts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing. What's happening to climate? What's happening to the warmth of the city? What's happening to water that's expanding? So think about some of these things. Okay? So you look at this flood data and you try to answer some of the questions. So take from this table what you think is important. So the severity of flooding decreased, but CO2 has risen. So what do you deduce from that? Okay? There's also an important section on why is Philadelphia prone to flooding? Okay, and it talks about the drainage system. However, extra water can rise and flow into the streets. What have we done in the streets? Is there a lot of litter in the streets? Is there a lot of leaves in the streets? Things like this. Are the drains adequate? Also, it talks about things like these are areas that have been covered over, which used to be sort of like streams, which naturally would have drained into the ground. However, that water is kept on the surface. Where is it going? Okay? And it says we cannot restore all the creeks. So what needs to be done to overhaul the city's infrastructure to deal with this type of water? Okay, so we can talk about storms also. It's a little bit about climate change. You might want to mention about climate change. And there's a couple of viewpoints here putting about climate change. So listen to and read through this. Also, tidal range. This is changing. How is that going to affect Philadelphia? Okay, surging seas. So read through this information. Apply it to your report. Okay? So if we go back to the report, if you look at the questions, you've looked at some of the problems of surface water. You've looked at also some of the causes of runoff. You want to look at permeability, and is the surface permeable, impermeable? Okay? And give examples of ways we can reduce or lower a runoff charge which is charged in Philadelphia to residents. How could we reduce that? How could we reduce the runoff? And then the last part of the paper gives an opinion supported by fact to whether the current charges deter residents. Is it working? to stop the amount of runoff on the surface? If not, why not? Back it up. So if you live in Philadelphia, look at your water bill and see. You'll see a separate charge. Do you think this is a reasonable way to motivate homeowners to remove non-porous surfaces and replace them with porous surfaces, allowing water to pass through? Or do you just think the standing water isn't so much of a problem, or climate change is not affecting weather patterns or affecting the expansion of water, okay, or causing greater storms? So this is what you need for the paper. It is, like I said, only 2 pages, but try to back it up with some of the data. Find some external data. And if you have any problems, speak to me on Canvas chat, okay, or email me and I'll try to explain it. Okay? Thank you. Hope you have a good day.